Okay, today we are reviewing trig graphing. The directions on the quiz will be slightly different than the directions here. Here it says draw at least 2 cycles of the function's graph. On your quiz, what I have done instead is for each problem, I have drawn in for you the axes and the scaling that I desire, which for most problems goes from negative 2 pi to 2 pi. There's some problems that I scaled differently. But for every problem, you will actually see your x and y axis on there. And then the directions say complete the entire space. So that could be drawing just 1 cycle. It could be drawing 2 cycles like we've done normally. It could be drawing 12 cycles, okay, if they're really short cycles. But you need to complete the entire space that I've marked out, which for most problems is going to be negative 2 pi to 2 pi. Okay? That way there's more consistency in that everybody's really should look exactly the same when they come in this way. Before every question, there are some fill in the blanks that guide you through the important things to think about. Not only are they helpful to you in kind of triggering memory and what you need to think about, but each one of those blanks is also worth a point. So filling them in is really important to get all of your points. So for number 1, the amplitude is going to be what? 1. The amplitude is the multiplier in front of the trig function. So there's nothing in front of the word sine, so it's like 1 times sine. The period for pi and cosine is 2 pi divided by b. What is b in this problem? 2. So we end up with a period length of just pi then. Where it says side or up down, I mean, is there any shifting involved in this graph? No, there's nothing added or subtracted, and that's what creates shifting. Write no, or put a cross through it, or do something that lets me know you considered it and decided there was not, as opposed to just leaving it blank, and then I don't know whether you thought about it or didn't think about it. So do something in there to indicate to me that you know that there is no shifting involved in this graph. The shape, this is our sequence of points that we're going to plot. So the shape for the sine graph is middle up, middle down, middle. So filling in each of those 4 blanks is worth a point each. So that gives you 4 points before you've actually plotted anything. Then we need to start plotting this. Sine begins in the middle. There's no shifting, so that's right at the origin. At the end of 1 period, which is pi, it's back at the middle. And in the center of its cycle, it's in the middle. Halfway between the first 2 middles, it has an up. And halfway between the second 2 middles, it has a down. So that's what our little curve would look like. The directions then say, fill in the entire space. So for this one, I'm going to need to copy this one over 1 more time to the right. And 2 times out to the left. So that we get the full space drawn in. Remember, they should be pretty curvy, not really pointy. Okay, I'm not going to be super picky about that, but if I see like straight lines connecting these dots and it's definitely a V shape and not a U shape, I will deduct for that. If they get a little bit less than perfect, I mean, one of mine here looks a little bit pointy, that's not a big deal. But I want to know that you know it's a curve and a wave, not completely straight lines. So make sure that you're giving it a rounded shape as much as possible. So that question and all the questions on here are going to be worth 5 points. 1 point for each of the blanks, and then 1 point for putting all that information into the graph. If your graph matches your information, but let's say that you got the amplitude wrong, but you graphed what you thought the amplitude was, I'm not going to deduct from you again. Okay? That's another reason why I want all these blanks filled in here, so that I know where the mistake was made in the course of you doing this problem. Did you misunderstand what an amplitude was supposed to be, or did you just do an oops putting it into the graph, or where exactly were the problems occurring? That helps me to kind of see through your thought process, since otherwise if all I see is a graph, I don't know what you were thinking when you made it. Okay. Questions? All right, so for the next one, Once again, it will already be marked out for you, so you won't have to do your own scaling. And most of them are going to go negative 2 pi to 2 pi. Amplitude for this one. Positive 2. So our amplitude is a multiplier in front of the trig function, but an amplitude being a height is always a positive value. The period of this is 2 pi divided by 1. There's just a 1 in front of the x, so our b value on this one is 1. So our period length is 2 pi. Is there any shifting to the side or up or down? No, nothing is added or subtracted here, but there is a change made to our graph. And what is it? It's flipped. That negative a value creates a flip in our graph. So cosine, which usually starts up, is going to end up starting down. So down, middle, up, middle, down is going to be our pattern.
Is cosine usually up, middle, down,
Yeah.
middle?
Do we have to know the middle up, middle down?
Yep, you need to know the sequence of the points, the shape. All right, so then when I go to start plotting points, cosine for this one, our shape says is going to start in the down position with an amplitude of 2. At the end of one period length, it's going to be down again. So under 2 pi, it will be down, since 2 pi is the period length. And halfway between, it will be up. It goes up just as much as it went down. Halfway between those, it has to cross through the middle line. And then complete that same shape one more time, heading out to the left. Again, with cosine, make sure that you're careful of your tails. I don't want those tails pointing straight down because it's never going to go lower than that down line. That down line of negative 2 is the lowest this graph will ever be, so those tails need to be turning back up to go into a new cycle. Questions? All right, for the next one then, what is the amplitude? 1. 1 is multiplied in front of the sign. There's an invisible 1 right there in front of it. The period is 2 pi divided by 2. There's a 2 with the x. So our period length is just pi. Is there any shifting to the side or up or down?
Up.
Up 1. So if there's none, just write none or no or put a line through it or do something to let me know that there's none. If there is, tell me specifically what it is. Don't just say yes, but tell me what you think the shifting is. But the shifting here should be going up 1. Our shape for sine is middle up, middle down, middle. So in our graph, the first thing that we need to do is adjust for that shifting. So we need to go up 1. And create a guideline, that's going to be our new middle. So that then when I plot points and say I start in the middle, I'm really starting on that line. At the end of one period, which is pi, I'm back in the middle. And in the middle, I'm in the middle. Up first, then down, and the amplitude is 1. This graph should look exactly like the graph for problem number 1, because the equations are exactly the same except for that plus 1, which is just going to take the whole graph and bump it up 1 line. Otherwise, it looks exactly the same because the equations are exactly the same except for that plus 1. One thing to be careful is I've had several students in the past when they start to try to copy the pattern out to the left, they actually kind of do it backwards. I'm going to draw in a bad way to do it. A lot of students will kind of work their way backwards and say, okay, middle, up, middle, down, middle. And so then they get this kind of like weird hump thing happen in the center here. Okay, it never turns on its middle line. Okay, I totally understand why some students are doing that as you work your way through the pattern going forward, and then you're working through the same pattern as you go backwards, but you should kind of be working through the pattern backwards if you're going backwards. So be careful of that. We should never end up with like a little M in the middle of the sine graph there. Okay, it needs to be a nice smooth wave the whole time. Just be careful of that. All right, for number 4, again, Word doesn't really like my equation fonts here. I'll write that out again. All right, what is the amplitude? 1. There's nothing multiplied in front of the cosine, so there's an invisible 1 there. The period is 2 pi divided by 1, because there's a 1 multiplied by the x. B is the multiplier of x, and there's nothing multiplied by x. Shifting to the side or up or down?
Down.
To the side, which side?
Right.
The right pi halves. Okay, when it's with the x, it's a sideways shift, and it goes opposite of the sign indicated. So since this is minus, it actually is going to go over to the positive side, so it goes to the right. If it was plus, it would go backwards to the left. And the shape of our cosine graph is up, middle, down, middle, up.
So that doesn't flip it at all. It
Doesn't flip it,
just moves
just moves it. Yep, a negative a value, so like where the amplitude is, would give us the flip. Alright, so first thing we need to do is take care of that shift. So I need to move to the right of pi halves. So I'm going to, on my graph, mark out halves of pi's. And I'm going to go over one of those halves of pi's. And that's going to create a new starting line for us. So that's where we're going to begin our pattern. So cosine begins its pattern with an up. So on that new starting line, I have an up. 2 pi away from here, it should be up again. That is not above where it says 2 pi. It needs to be 2 pi away from here. So that's like 2 pi and a half. It should be up again. So that the length between those 2 points is 2 pi. Halfway between, it should be down. And then between those, it crosses through the middle. Then we can kind of use the fact that every half marking has a point on it to work our way back here and put a point at every half marking. So that we fully complete from negative 2 pi out to 2 pi. Questions? Is it okay if I scroll? So I'll go away when I do that. Okay, so our next two graphs change us over to tangent. So this was our most recent lesson. With tangent, I will usually just mark from negative pi to pi. Not necessarily, so you'll just fill out whatever markings are there. But often for tangent, I'm just going to mark from negative pi to pi. With tangent, we don't really talk about an amplitude because it doesn't really have a height since it really ends up going up and down forever. But there is a point we need to consider the height of, and that's those offset points, which I called the first point. And what would that be for this one? 1. But I am going to say in here that we do have a flip also. The period for tangent is just pi divided by b. So that is important to note. Sine and cosine we do 2 pi, but tangent we just do pi. Okay, tangent is a faster moving graph. What is b? 1. I did actually write b, it just looks like okay. Is there any shifting in this graph? So there's that -2 there. Is it going to be a side or a down? It's going to be a down because it's not in parentheses with the x. Something will only shift side to side if it's connected in directly with the x by having parentheses grouping it together. Otherwise, if it's added in the front or the back without parentheses, it will still be an up-down shift. Okay, that's an order of operations thing. That if we were performing arithmetic in this problem, we would do our tangent first and then subtract 2 from it. Okay? So without parentheses, it will always be an up-down, whether it happens in the front of the equation or the back of the equation. Asymptotes. Our rule for asymptotes are that they are at half of the period, so that would be pi halves for this problem. Here to read. So first thing I'm going to do is take care of that shifting down 2. So I'm going to go down 2 spots. I don't have any sideways shifting, and you're always going to have a point where any shifted lines or original axes meet. So I'll just go ahead and put a point there. That helps me remember that this thing is shifted. Asymptotes happen at pi halves, or half of the way to pi. So I would place those in next. And the height of our first point is 1, but it's flipped upside down. So as I go towards the right-hand side, halfway between our point and the asymptote, I have a point down 1. And as I go to the left, halfway back, I have a point up 1. Yeah, so we haven't actually filled in the whole given space because we haven't gone out all the way to the pi and the negative pi. So you have 2 options here. One option is to go beyond what's required to do in another full cycle. So as I would go out to the right, a cycle width should be the length of the period, so I would need to go a pi away to place another asymptote. So that would be a pi and a half. Into my 3 points. Again, exactly the same. Which is fine. We've gone beyond the markings. That's totally okay. I will not deduct for doing more than you need to do. I will deduct, however, for doing less. So your other option is to just do exactly what's required, and you could just do like a partial cycle if you wanted, and that would be fine. That still gets me all the way to the marking. So for some people, that's fine that you can see kind of where it would split up and you just do the partial cycle. For other people, it's easier to just go ahead and do the whole thing. And if you want to do that, that's totally fine. Okay? But these parts that are dotted in there aren't totally required. Okay. So you could do either 3 fulls or you could do a 1 and 2 parts here. But somehow you have to get yourself all the way from the negative pi to the pi. The next one, what is our height? 1. The period is pi over 2. Pi divided by b, which is just going to be pi over 2. Any shifting in this one? No. And our asymptotes are going to be at half of the period, or half of pi halves is pi fourths. So we need to cut this pi into 4 pieces. And our asymptotes are going to be over one of those pi fourths pieces. Point right at the origin. And halfway between that origin point and the asymptotes, we get our 2 offset points, which in this problem have a height of 1. And then connect through. The width of a period on this one is pi halves. If each of those marks represents a fourth, 2 fourths is a half. So I want to go over 2 of those markings to make another asymptote. And do the same 3 points. You could also do the same thing going backwards, 2. And making the same 3 points. Now, like the last one, again, I haven't quite made it all the way to the pi and negative pi. So you could either draw in 2 more complete cycles and end up with 5 cycles, or you could just draw in the halves of cycles that match the pattern that's already there. So this one needs 3 fulls and 2 halves, or it needs 5 fulls to get you all the way from the negative pi to pi. Questions? For this last one, I'm going to go negative 2 pi right on the left. But on the right, I'm going to go to 3 pi. Again, that wouldn't be a choice you would make. That will be there for you already, and then your job is just to complete in as much as is there. I'm going to rewrite this again. It's a little bit more clear. Amplitude. Three. Amplitude is the number in front of the trig function, so it's 3. Period. We're back to a sign now, so we're looking at 2 pi divided by b, and what is b? 1. It's just 2 pi. Shifting.
Over pi.
Over to the right a pi and up 2. We have 2 kinds of shifting on this one. So in the parentheses is side to side and backwards of indicative, so we're going to go to the right a pi. Outside of the parentheses is up or down doing what it says, so it says to go up 2. This is a sign graph. There's no flipping on it because that 3 is a positive, so middle up, middle down, middle. I'm going to take care of shifting first. So I'm going to go up 2 spots, and that makes a new middle line. And I'm going to go to the right a pi, and that creates a new starting line. Then sine begins in the middle, so that is right where that middle line meets the starting line. At the end of one period, which is 2 pi, I should be back in the middle. Now that's not where it says 2 pi, that's 2 pi away from our first point. So 2 pi away from pi is really 3 pi. And in its center, it's in the middle. Halfway between it goes up, it needs to go up 3. I don't really have room for that, so it's just, floating somewhere up there. And then down 3. Then I need to repeat this exact pattern one more time. 2 pi away from my start would put me back at a negative pi. Halfway between and an up and a down. I still haven't quite filled it in all the way, so what I can do is kind of look at what I have so far, unless I want to do a whole nother complete cycle and go beyond, and I can say at every pi marking, I have a middle point. So at the 2 pi, I must have a middle point. And then we don't want that weird M thing to happen here. So it's heading in the downward direction into that point. So I must have a down needed there. Okay? So you can just do a partial cycle that way by completing out and just copying and mimicking the same pattern that's already there. Or you could mark out extra and do another whole cycle.